Ciao y'all, NaturallyKenya here, and today I'm going to be talking about what it's like to study engineering in the US versus Italy. Okay, honestly, I don't need these. I have contacts on, but I was trying to make geek effect, nerd effect, you know, because every engineer is a nerd, right? Sure. Ciao y'all, NaturallyKenya here, and welcome back to my channel. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Today is going to be a fun video because I am talking about what it's like to study engineering in the US, where I'm from, versus Italy. As some of you may or may not know, I actually moved to Italy last year to complete my master's degree, but I have my bachelor's degree in the US in civil engineering. That's a little bit about me, but I'm gonna go into a few pointers of what it's like in the US versus Italy. Number one is the format. For example, in the US, if you do a bachelor's degree, it is 4 years, and in Italy, the bachelor's is 3 years, plus the 2 years that you will do for your master's degree. So in total, it will be 5 years. Whereas in the US, if you did a master's and a bachelor's degree, it would be a total of 6 years. So the calendar and exam schedule is definitely a lot different than the US here in Italy, because in the US, generally the semester is 14 or 15 weeks long, and then following that, you have an exam period. And following that, I mean 3, 4, 5 days later, you'll start taking your exams for your 4 or 5 classes. And the thing that's most different here is that you have approximately 2 months or even 3 months to take these exams, whereas in the US you have your 15 weeks plus 3 or 4 days of nothing, holiday, but they're not holiday because you have to study, and then it's followed by a few days of exams. I want to say maybe 2 weeks or like up to 10 days where you have to take all of your exams in that time period. Here in Italy, I have noticed that the semester varies between 13 or 14 weeks, and then you have months to take the exams. For example, the fall semester in the US will be from the last week of August to the 1st or 2nd week of December, and then you have your 2 weeks or so of exam. But here I have classes from the end of September to around the middle/end of December before Christmas holidays, with a period of 2 or 3 weeks break. And then you have the option to take those 2 exams in January and February of the following year. But also you have a summer session that you can take those exams in as well, which I will go into more detail later in the video about. So to summarize, the semester in the US is a bit longer by 2 weeks, but the time you have to take your exams is minimal, up to approximately 10 days. Where in Italy, it's 13 or 14 weeks of the semester, and you have 2 months plus to take your exams in that time period. In terms of admission in the US, there were a lot of things that I had to submit going from high school into university. For example, the application fee. There was an essay, you had to obviously submit your transcripts. There was an option to submit your resume as well, a letter of recommendation, your SAT or ACT scores, like the list goes on and on. But for example, here in Italy, at least in my case, I know there's different specifications or degrees that have a limited number of entrances available, but I just had to send for my master's degree, I just had to send my high school transcript and my university transcript and a passport photo, and that was it. So it wasn't like I had to do brain surgery. There was no letters of recommendation, nothing like that for me to study here in Italy. So the process was much faster in that sense, so you didn't have to prepare documents and have a lot of different effort. But like I said before, this may just vary between universities in Italy, so don't get happy thinking that you might be in the same situation as, you know, I was. It could very well be quite different. Oh, the fun topic, the money part, the tuition costs and fees. When you compare the US to Italy, this is probably the most different topic. I'm actually going to be comparing like the school that I went to in the US to Italy. So for example, if I wanted to do a master's degree in the US, my tuition for the year would be approximately $12,000. Here it is. That's a full-time schedule. I'll put it here. It's a full-time schedule, and it calculates only the tuition. That's not food, that's not water, that's not housing, that's not breathing, that's not living, that's not socializing, that's not walking down the street. Well, okay, that could be walking down the street. As long as you don't have to take a bus or drive your car, you're good. That will be free. It's essentially $12,146 a year. Actually took it upon myself to convert that into euros, so you can see that that's 1 year. Here in Italy, the tuition actually varies depending on if you choose a public or private school. It can be anywhere from 500 euros from people from developing countries to up to maybe 4,000 or 5,000 euros. But I mean, if you go to a public university, I think it would vary anywhere between 1,000 euros and maybe 3,000. I know that it definitely varies based on your personal income and your university. And supposedly there are scholarships available. There are Italian government scholarships available. The United States was not on the eligible countries list, so I couldn't be that lucky. There are definitely opportunities available for people coming from different countries. You really just have to do your research and look into it, because generally it's not that organized. Ooh, the good one. This is also a good one. Homework, which just seems so different here. So in university in the US, for some of my classes, we would have to take assignments, do the exercises, and they would be due the following class. So if this was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, you would be assigned Monday exercises, they would be due Wednesday, you'd be assigned exercises Wednesday, and then they would be due Friday, and so on. Friday, Monday, Monday, Wednesday, Wednesday, Friday, so on and so on. Here, it's not necessarily like that. It's your responsibility to pick up all the information in class. The only homework I've had so far are group projects, and that's not necessarily a homework assignment because it generally goes over the entire semester. So it's not like tonight you have to do this, tonight is due tomorrow. It's not like that at all, at least not in the situations that I've been in. I would definitely say in the US there's a lot more homework. There are a lot more projects, at least for my master's degree. There will be more projects, I'm assuming, in the US. There's just a lot more, I guess you could say, independent work in the US. So let's talk about exams. Earlier I mentioned how we have approximately 10 days to take all the 4 or 5 exams of a full-time semester, where in Italy there are different exams for different dates. So for example, if I'm taking 4 or 5 classes and the semester ends, I have different exam dates available to take the exam for each class, which is also very important because the exam format in Italy is a lot different than it is in the US. Specifically in the US, you have 1 try. That means if you destroy the exam, I don't know anyone that was able to redo a final exam. You essentially have 1 try, that's it. And it's a written exam usually, or it could be a presentation or project, and that percentage of the final exam really depends on how many exams were in the class earlier in the semester. So if there's like a first exam or a midterm for 20%, and the second exam was 20%, and the rest is homework and participation, and then you get to the final exam, that could be 30%. But here in Italy, the exams are a lot different than what I'm used to in the US. This is probably the most difficult part of Italian university in my opinion. I know that Italian students have taken oral exams almost their whole lives, but for people coming from other countries, it may not be the normal thing to do. Like for me, that's not a normal thing to do. You definitely have to know all of the theory, all of the formulas for some classes. It's really, honestly, much more mentally exhausting than the exams in the US were. The professor can ask you anything he or she wants, and you have to be able to describe that in detail. At the end of everything, I really think that I'm going to become a better engineer for these oral exams, just because we don't necessarily have that place for you to formally present your ideas and topics like immediately. Like you have to think and answer the question in 2 seconds. I guess it's a skill that I think everyone should have. It is something that's definitely growing on me. I definitely don't think even after the 2 years in the master's program I will be completely an expert in it, because it is still new for me, but I just like to try my best anytime I have one of these exams. The grade scale. For example, in Italy, you are graded on a 30-point scale. You have, well, I don't want to say unlimited tries. You have more than 1 try. I think you could even have up to 5, 6, 7, 8 tries, whatever the program allows you to have, just for passing 1 class. Of course, you don't want to use 5 or 8 tries to pass a class, but the opportunity is there. Whereas in the US, you have 1 try and that's all. So it's like, hit or miss. In the US, there is a 4.0 scale for university. Actually, I'm gonna put the scale here. This is the university scale that's used by my university in Texas. You have a 30-point scale here in Italy, and I think 18 is passing. I'm gonna put exactly what the Italian system and the US system and how they align here, just for a little bit of a comparison. At the end of your entire master's program, you're actually graded on the classwork and the thesis for your final mark. And last but not least, the resources and support. This is very different from me being a student from the US and coming to Italy, because it's very different. In the US, professors will allow you to have open office hours Monday, Wednesday, Friday from noon to 2 p.m. or by appointment. But it seems like here in Italy, a lot of the time if you needed help to meet with your professor, you would actually have to do it by appointment. The time limit of office hours are very small. They're not, I guess, published as readily as they are in the US. Also in the US, with your tuition fees, you actually get certain services. Like, I remember there was a gym, or if you needed counseling services, certain things like that, those were all free and included with the tuition. I say free, but I mean, I hardly think $12,000 means, you know, it's free. You know, that's not really free. So guys, that is the overview of what studying engineering is like in the US versus Italy. There are definitely a lot of differences, not necessarily positive or negative, but it's just different, you know? If you have any questions or comments, leave them for me down below. Make sure to like this video if I help you in any way. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao, y'all.